session.
It's a life metaphor.
I was just thinking that. I was like, yes, in life, we're all
I've been told this is not a dress rehearsal. I'm so confused. Everything we learned was wrong, actually. I'm looking at the art behind you.
It's actually a painter from Cincinnati, Ohio.
No kidding.
Yeah, Pat Olding is, and she does vegetables and fruits and things in large scale. So there's my Swiss chard, very beloved Swiss chard.
Very nice.
Okay. Like at first I was like, I know that's not rhubarb, but I don't know what it is. As someone who doesn't garden and yet does eat vegetables, what's the scale?
It's about 3.5, 4 feet.
Big. Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell sometimes in his.
I know. I know. Sometimes I'm like, it's enormous, and it's really like 12 inches.
Okay, Grace, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Thank you, Ed. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's book chat at University Bookstore virtually, featuring Maggie Smith in conversation with Ruth Dickey for the book launch of Goldenrod. My name is Grace, and I'm the events producer here at University Bookstore in Seattle, Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. We would love to hear where you're zooming in from, so please let us know in the chat. Thank you for supporting tonight's author event in a local indie bookstore. University Bookstore is the oldest independent bookstore in the region. In fact, we're celebrating our 121st anniversary this year. Tonight, we are thrilled to present the award-winning poet and best-selling author of Keep Moving and Good Bones, Maggie Smith. Her latest, Goldenrod, is a stunning poetry collection that celebrates the beauty and messiness of life. Poems that look at parenthood, solitude, love, and memory. Pulling objects from everyday life, a hallway mirror, a rock found in her son's pocket, a field of goldenrods at the side of the road, Maggie reveals the magic of the present moment, which we could all really use right now. Maggie Smith is the award-winning author of Good Bones, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, Lamp of the Body, and the national bestseller, Keep Moving, Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change, a 2011 recipient of a creative writing fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. Maggie has also received several individual excellence awards from the Ohio Arts Council, 2 Academy of American Poets prizes, a Pushcart Prize, and fellowships from the Sustainable Arts Foundation and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She's been widely published, appearing in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Paris Review, the Best American Poetry, and more. You can follow her on social media at Maggie Smith Poet. Moderating the discussion today, we're excited to have another poet join us, Ruth Dickey, who has spent 25 years working at the intersection of community building, writing, and art. Her first book, Mud Blooms, was selected for the Mura Award from Harbor Mountain Press and awarded a 2019 Silver Nautilus for books that make a better world. The recipient of a Mayor's Arts Award from Washington, D.C., Ruth is an ardent fan of dogs, books, and coffee, and is in the midst of moving from Seattle to New York, where she recently began as the new executive director of the National Book Foundation. So I think this is an amazing pairing. We have been waiting for this beautiful event for quite some time. A few announcements before we start. This event is being recorded for later playback on our YouTube channel, and we'll be dropping the link for the books in the chat periodically, so you can click on those to purchase a copy through us. And Maggie sent us some signed book plates, so we will be including those in our book orders. And after the discussion, there'll be a chance for audience Q&A, but anytime during the discussion, please feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A field at the bottom of your Zoom screens, and we'll get to them at the end. And now, enough about me. Let's go on and talk more with the 2 stars of today, Maggie and Ruth.
Thank you so much, Grace. And Maggie, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm so honored to get to talk to you, and I absolutely loved your book, and I wondered if you would please be willing to start by sharing a couple poems with us in your own voice.
Of course, Ruth, thank you. It's so nice. It's nice to meet you in this 2-dimensional space, and thanks for spending time. I'm so glad you liked the book. I'll just kind of flip through and read a few. I think I'll start with the title poem. That seems logical. So this is Goldenrod. I'm no botanist. If you're the color of sulfur and growing at the roadside, you're goldenrod. You don't care what I call you, whatever you were born as. You don't know your own name. But driving near Peoria, the sky pink orange, the sun bobbing at the horizon, I see everything is what it is exactly, in spite of the words I use. Black cows, barns falling in on themselves. You. Dear flowers born with a highway view, forgive me if I've mistaken you. Goldenrod, whatever your name is, you are with your own kind. Look, the meadow is a mirror full of you, your reflection repeating. Whatever you are, I see you, wild yellow, and I would let you name me. There are a few poems in this book that reference something I have lying around here, I bet. I won't be able to find it. That reference these nature treasures that my son leaves in his pockets or sometimes puts in my pockets. And usually on my desk, there are several little feathers and stones and seashells and acorns and little bits of things lying around. And this is one of those poems. It was also inspired by a sort of quarantine late night walk, one of those walks that we could take where we could actually take our masks off and be outside without fear of running into others. The poem is called Talisman. They look like gifts a crow might bring a human girl desperate to impress her. In the left pocket of my thrifted emerald coat, a scuffed acorn, a glassy black stone, one pink Mr. Potato Head ear. When I touch them, I can believe almost anything. Who's to say they can't keep me safe? Who's to say a bird can't court someone's daughter? But in this life, it's my son who shows his love like a creature that clever, leaving treasures for my fingers to worry against. I carry them like anything I love until they warm in my palm, until I believe. Walking alone at night, the sky feathered blue-black and slowly folding over me, I pocket my left hand and tell myself a story about my life, a story I call Talisman, a story that might end well if I tell it right. Maybe I'll stop there. Just a taste of two, one from early in the book and one from late.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Thank you for reading a bit for us. I'd love to start by hearing, I know many of us are fans of not only this book, but also Good Bones and Keep Moving. And I wondered how the process of writing this book was different for you. And did you feel the presence in any way of more eager readers who were waiting for the next book?
You know, the process really doesn't change, which I guess is a good thing. It maybe would be alarming if the process changed. The process that I sort of undergo writing an individual poem or putting a book together is the same process that it was 20 years ago. And so the poems in Goldenrod really start where the poems from Good Bones end. And this book is a collection of poems that I saw to be in conversation, starting from the last, sort of mid 2015 through the end of 2020. So it just means that when I finished Good Bones, I had some poems I was working on at the time that weren't quite ready to go into that book. And then I kept writing and writing and writing one poem at a time. And at the end of all of this time, I printed out everything and saw what I had. It was more than a book. And then had to kind of winnow through and decide which ones wanted to travel together and which ones seemed to be in conversation and which ones didn't really seem to fit organically in with whatever else was happening. And so those had to go back and sit on the bench and didn't get to get on the field and play. And maybe their time is coming. But that process is pretty much the process every time. It's messy. It's writing a poem at a time, not knowing what on earth I'm doing, and then printing it all out and shuffling them in a very old-fashioned way, and finally seeing the shape of the thing that I've been building sort of unwittingly, one brick at a time over several years.
Oh, I love that, writing and writing one poem at a time. It's such a beautiful way to sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's different, but it's not like you sit down to write a novel when you're writing
Mhm.
a book of poems. You sit down to write a poem, and then if you're lucky, another one comes tapping at the glass a week or a month or 6 months later. And then if you're lucky and you leave the light on, another one shows up. And it
Mhm.
just takes time.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved about the book is that you balance poems that are incredibly personal about family and your children and divorce, and then poems about reckoning with the pain of the broken world and the injustice in the world. And I'd love to talk about both types of poems and kind of starting with the personal. I wonder, how do you decide what is in bounds to go in poems about your kids and about your life? And is there anything that is out of bounds?
I mean, I suppose there probably are things that are out of bounds, but I think that line is probably an intuitive line.
Mhm.
Just like the line of things that we might, say in conversation to someone, we're always sort of like negotiating within ourselves. What do we hold back and what feels like it's safe for public consumption?
Mhm.
And I think I'm often negotiating that in both prose and in poems. Um, my kids are getting to an age now where some of these stories that I might want to tell about them are actually their own stories that
Mm.
they might want to tell themselves in their own words. It's not the same as when you're describing a baby. If you're describing someone who's 12, they have their own agency. They could write their own
Mhm.
stories.
Mhm.
So that's something I think about a lot. But I have to kind of trust my own sort of like inner tuning that I know
Mhm.
sort of what's right and what's maybe something I shouldn't put in a book. Like if I thought it would embarrass them, I
Mhm.
wouldn't put it in the book. um yeah, so that's, and I don't know, I think it's sort of an intuitive thing when deciding how to address sort of bigger issues too, and how
Mhm.
one does that.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to the next question I was going to ask you is when you are writing poems that are more political and about the wider world, is the process different at all for you? And if so, how? And how those poems appear, how you wrestle with them?
Yeah, I think the process isn't necessarily different, but there's a lot more hand wringing, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think I have a lot of trepidation about handling things straight on. So I tend
Mm-hmm.
to like approach things through sort of a side door. And there are a couple of poems in Goldenrod. Well, maybe three. I'm thinking airplanes and tender age
Mm-hmm.
and animals that are fairly straight on. It's not really veiled in metaphor or persona. There aren't a lot of layers that the reader has to dig through. There's no symbolism. It just is what it is. And I
Mm-hmm.
haven't until this book really let myself do that. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't really done that, and I think I've been nervous about it because one of the quickest ways to kill a poem, at least if it's my poem, is to give it a job. um, and I didn't want, actually, and Half Staff, I guess, is another poem in this book that deals with something somewhat political. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, if you sit down to write a poem about school shootings or
Mm-hmm.
about parents and children being separated at the border, or about gentrification, or about police brutality, or I mean, the racism poem, the misogyny poem,
Mm-hmm.
that's giving the poem a really big job. And I think it's easy to flub that and have it be something sort of inelegant that tells the reader that bad things are bad, which the reader knows. So I think even in my poems that are more overtly political, they're still personal poems. I'm still drawing from my personal experience, either
Mm-hmm.
as a child, thinking back to my childhood, or as a mother parenting children and realizing that my experience as a parent is both complicated by these issues, but also that because of my own privilege, I don't have to deal with certain things that other mothers of other children have to deal with. So the personal is really still the sort of intermediary in those poems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wondered as you were putting the collection together, how you thought about kind of that vein of the political poems that run through it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to stack them. I will say
Mhm.
that. Like, I really wanted them to come to sort of thread more organically throughout the book, because that's life. I mean, the the book really reflects a lot of the living that I did between 2015 and 2020. So, my kids grow up. Some days I'm just walking my dog and having observations. Some days I'm watching the news and I don't know what on earth to think. Um, I started out writing these poems married, and I stopped writing these poems divorced. And so all of these changes are happening in the book, and I really didn't want to sort of pen them in different little containers or have it be too sort of segmented. That's not really what I wanted to do. I didn't want it to sort of be compartmentalized.
Mhm.
Like, this is the political section, or these are the personal poems, because we don't live like that. And I wanted it to sort of mirror more the experience of being an American, which is, you are dealing with all of this stuff in sort of different ratios every
Mhm.
day, all the time.
Yeah, I think you did that so beautifully in the collection. I think that's such a great point. Um, I One of my favorite poems in the collection was "During lockdown, I let my dog sleep in my bed again." And I loved the way that it captures the poignancy of the pandemic and for its vulnerability. And I wondered, how do you think about vulnerability in poems?
Funny, vulnerability isn't hard for me. um, Getting up on stage in front of people, difficult. But vulnerability on the page, not difficult.
Mm,
And I think the reason it's not hard for me in poems is because when I'm writing a poem, it's a really protected private environment that I'm working in. It's a conversation I'm having with myself on the page. And I don't have anybody standing there waiting for me to finish it so I can hand it to them. It's not like I'm writing it in front of a crowd and they're waiting for me to finish it and read it. And so the beauty, I think, of the writing process being something that you can sort of like do privately and incubate the poems over years in some cases. Some of these poems I started when my kids were babies, and I didn't finish them until they entered middle school. So that long incubation process that happens privately makes the vulnerability possible, because all that work is done in a sort of safe space. It's you, your brain, your heart, piece of paper, and a pen. And if any nerves come up, it's the first time you have to read that poem aloud with
mm,
other human beings in a room or on a screen. And having that sense of, oh, now I'm standing naked in front of others. So sharing poems publicly can feel vulnerable in a way that gives you like a little twinge until you get over the hump. But being vulnerable on the page, um, I think, just requires us to sort of tune out any idea of audience other than ourselves while we're doing it, which also has the added benefit of allowing us to not self-censor or worry too much about what the reader wants or expects. We're just having a sort of pure relationship with a piece of work at that time.
that's such a beautiful way to capture what makes that vulnerability on the page possible. Another thing from that poem that I really loved was that capturing that pandemic moment. And I wondered, how did the pandemic affect your writing and your reading practice?
Well, I mean, I don't think I wrote as many poems in 2020 as I perhaps would have if I hadn't had two children Zooming school from my house every day. um, so having less, I mean, here I just said I need this private space to make these poems happen. Um, and that's the truth. I mean, I can get other kind of administrative writing stuff done in a busy, hectic time. I can submit poems, I can research literary magazines, I might even be able to do some edits, but I can't really write without being able to go into like a somewhat extended, quiet or music filled but private period of time. And so the pandemic made that sort of impossible to get the kind of stillness required to write a lot of poems. So I wasn't as productive during the pandemic, I think, as I would have been otherwise. But on the flip side of that, I know that the experience of having my kids around a lot that year was on balance positive for me and for them on the bright side. And that all of the experiences I had over the past year and a half will sort of metabolize slowly the way that experiences do to make poems. And so just because I didn't write more pandemic poems during the pandemic doesn't mean poems aren't going to come out of that experience still, right? Like there's no hard cutoff. I'm still writing about a birthday party I had when I was 8. I mean, there's no expiration date on lived experience. Like you get to write about it anytime you want. So that's the good news, is that even if we didn't have time, it's here.
Yes, that is a great point and great to remember. Another one of my favorite poems in the collection is How Dark the Beginning. And I especially love the lines, "We talk so much of light. Please speak to me on behalf of the good dark." And I wondered if you'd be willing to talk with us about what do you love about the good dark?
Yeah, maybe I'll read this one.
Yes, please.
And then talk a minute about it. This is How Dark the Beginning. All we ever talk of is light. Let there be light. There was light then, good light. But what I consider dawn is darker than all that. So many hours between the day receding and what we recognize as morning, the sun cresting like a wave that won't break over us, as if light were protective, as if no hearts were flayed, no bodies broken on a day like today. In any film, the sunrise tells us everything will be all right. Danger wouldn't dare show up now, dragging its shadow across the screen. We talk so much of light. Please, let me speak on behalf of the good dark. Let us talk more of how dark the beginning of a day is. The good dark, in some ways, is kind of an homage to James Wright, who's one of my favorite poets, the late, great James Wright, an Ohio poet, as I consider myself to be, as I've lived here my whole life. So I think I get to claim that. And one of my favorite books is his collection, The Branch Will Not Break. And he uses the words good and dark so many times, over and over and over, in those poems and in that book, that I feel like if the book and the poems were workshopped, certainly people around the seminar table would be like, word choice, like you've used good 15 times already. And frankly, as a workshop leader, I might even be tempted to say, you overuse good and dark. But there's something about it works in those poems. It like makes the weather of those poems. And I was thinking, just sort of metaphorically, as one does, about how morning, we associate light with hope and darkness with fear. And so in a horror movie, in the middle of the day, we know probably nothing bad's going to happen. But as soon as the sun goes down, that's when the people lock the doors and they close the curtains, and the bad guys are coming. And life doesn't work like that. Bad things happen in broad daylight every day. And yet morning begins at 12:01 a.m. and it's pitch black. And we have several hours of pitch black before any light starts to show on the horizon. And particularly over this past year and a half, and this is one of the later poems, that felt like a useful metaphor for patience. And I don't know, I have a sort of strange, complicated relationship with optimism, but patience and a kind of optimism, because at 12:01, it's morning, but it looks like night and it feels like night. But if you watch the horizon long enough, it will start to pale. and just feeling that that need in my own life, to know that just because it's dark doesn't mean something bad's going to happen. Maybe it's just dark because it's really early morning. It's a new beginning, and new beginnings are dark sometimes and hard. And we have to just sort of be patient through that part to get to the film sunrise part.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. Thank you for that. Such a wonderful poem. I'd love to hear you say more about your complicated relationship with optimism.
Well, yeah, I think I wrote in Keep Moving that I consider myself a recovering pessimist, a pessimist in recovery. This has been a really challenging few years to be a pessimist in recovery. There have been many opportunities to leap off the wagon, let alone fall off the wagon of optimism. But I think I grew up really, I grew up a firstborn daughter, very perfectionistic, classic firstborn, right? Like, it has to be done right, or why bother doing it? And I think I grew up also with a sort of self-protective pessimistic streak, which is expecting the worst. I'm going to fail the test. I'm not going to make the team. The boy's not going to call. The magazine's not going to want the poem. Having a self-protective pessimistic outlook, because if you expect the worst, then you'll be pleasantly surprised if you're wrong. And if you expect the worst and something good happens or something bad happens, then you were just right. And we do love to be right. Like, that's sort of satisfying in its own way too. Like, see, I told you, I knew it wasn't going to work. I knew they weren't going to want that poem. I knew he wasn't going to call. And I just had this realization, particularly when my marriage ended, and it was sort of like, okay, one of the worst things that could have happened to me just happened. So the worst has happened. And yet here I am. Like, things kind of burned down around me, but I'm still standing. And me worrying about more bad things happening is just poisoning the time I have. If I worry for a week that I'm not going to get this thing that I want, or that this isn't the phone call that I'm expecting is going to be bad news, then regardless of what the news is in a week, I've ruined that whole week in the meantime, regardless of what happens. And so it's just occurred to me that maybe I should realize that as many things can go right as can go wrong, which I think is statistically true. It's not that it's more likely that bad things will happen. That's not the way the world works. And so I've been really trying to, when that little voice tells me that it's not going to work or it's not going to be okay, to sort of question that little voice, which is a voice I've carried since I was very young, and say, well, why not? Why maybe it will work out. Maybe it'll be fine. Lots of things are possible, and bad things are only one of the possible outcomes. So let's just keep an open mind and try not to get in our own heads about it too much.
Fantastic advice for all of us. When you spoke about James Wright and being an Ohio poet, and then you said, I claim being an Ohio poet. What does that mean for you?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to someone recently. I was talking to Sandra Beasley recently in a panel, and we were talking about, do we consider ourselves like women poets? Like, how do we, what identities do we claim as writers? And probably I am a little reticent to claim almost any identity as a poet other than just poet. But Ohio poet, I feel really comfortable claiming. And not only because I've lived here my whole life, but because so much of my sensibility, I think, is Midwestern. And the landscape itself, the trees, the birds, the rivers, the creeks, the lakes, that stuff populates the poems. So even if you found in a time capsule a couple of my books and knew nothing about me, and the covers were ripped off and you couldn't read a bio, some alien creature a million years from now would be able to probably discern where I lived and around what time, just based on the things that I write about in the poems. And it's completely Ohio.
Mm, that's fabulous. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about our conversation is not only are you a beloved poet with Keep Moving, you're also a beloved internet or online presence in a lot of our lives through social media and through the different posts. And I wondered how your presence on social media has interacted with your writing and your writing practice.
Well, I mean, there's a poem in Goldenrod that was born on Twitter because I saw someone else's tweet and created a poem inspired by the tweet. So it can be a fruitful space, but mostly it's been a really it hasn't, I wouldn't say it's impacted my writing process, Twitter, but it has impacted my relationship with readers. It's been, we're living in a time when and with people that I read also, I can read a book of poems and I can take a picture of the book and tag the writer in a tweet and say, oh my gosh, so-and-so person I have never met, I just read your book and I loved it. Everyone go buy this book. And then we might get into a conversation and perhaps end up having coffee at some later date if we happen to be in the same city. And so I find it really useful for sharing work, but also for creating a sense of community, literary community, which is really has been particularly challenging the last year and a half since we haven't been able to get on planes and actually be in bookstores. I wish I were in Seattle right now doing this and we could be seeing human beings and even signing books and giving hugs, which is something we used to be able to do once upon a time. But Twitter and Instagram and even Facebook, I think to a lesser extent, just make poetry more accessible. And I don't mean accessible like the content is easier to understand. I mean, it allows people to access poetry in spaces where perhaps they wouldn't expect to. And it allows them to have direct access to writers and readers. And I mean, there are so many interesting conversations that come up, and some beefs and some interesting little scandals too that keep things interesting. But mostly my experience, it's been really positive.
I really appreciate the framing of social media as something that is nourishing and a source of community. And I know as you were writing this book that music played an important role in something that was nourishing. Could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, it's probably the thing I consume more than literature, which I was thinking about that. I was talking to a friend the other day and I said, so a few of the events I get to do for Goldenrod are with singer-songwriters I admire. And what a strange thing it is to have an interaction with someone whose music you've been listening to in your headphones or on your, bedroom stereo for years and years and years, because I am not the soundtrack to people's day. They might read, I hope someone reads Goldenrod and maybe they listen to it on audiobook, but they're not listening to that over and over again on road trips or while walking the dog or while doing the dishes. It's not a song they dance to at their wedding. It's not a song they remember playing on the jukebox when they met their significant other. And so music is, I don't know, it's special in that way. It just, I think, is part of the fabric of my life in a way that even poetry isn't. And so I listen to it when I write. And I know a lot of writers don't do that or listen to instrumental music only when writing. But I like listening to music with lyrics when I write. And there's really not a time except for maybe right now when I'm doing a Zoom or if I have a phone call or if my kids are watching television or annoyed with me that I'm not listening to music. And chances are if somebody's watching TV in my house and tells me to turn the music off, I just put it in headphones and I'll just empty the dishwasher while wearing headphones while they're doing something else in another room. So it's really something that I'm kind of tapped into most waking hours of the day.
That's fabulous. And do I understand that all of us could find a playlist for the,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah?
I made a Goldenrod playlist on my Spotify, and I shared it on my Instagram. But and people can find it. If it doesn't, it's not like a song for song playlist. But I think if people listen, they might be able to like align some tracks with specific poems. There are definitely some that are. It's pretty obvious which poem I had in mind when I selected the song.
Ooh, that'll be a fun follow-up exercise for all of us. We can compare notes.
Something to walk the dog to when you want to put them in your AirPods or whatever.
Yeah. Um, I'd love to hear about your path to writing originally, and how did you find poems?
Music. Music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about this years ago. Like what were the first poems I was writing? And I think I was 13 or 14 when I started writing poems, but really I wasn't reading poems at 13 or 14. I don't think I really started reading poems until high school. It wasn't, they weren't taught. And even then it was just a few anthologized poems. It was, a little Emily Dickinson, a little Robert Frost. And so listening to my parents' record collection, which now I have on the shelf beside me, I've inherited it all. I would sit in, downstairs by the record player, or when I was old enough to have my own stereo in my bedroom, either a cassette tape or a record. And I would sit down and listen to the songs and try to write down the lyrics as I heard them. And so I remember very clearly trying to write down all the lyrics to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds when I was a kid, because it's plasticine porters with looking glass ties and cellophane flowers and newspaper taxis. And there's so much surrealism in that song. And it wasn't like any of the chapter books I was reading as a kid. There was no plot. People weren't talking to each other. Nobody got from location A to location B. No mystery was solved, but they somehow crystallized a moment and made you feel a certain way. And I just wanted to chase that feeling. And so I think I started writing little metaphors or little images and trying to describe things that I would see in a way that felt like that. And I don't think I knew at the time that what I was trying to do was poetry. It was just, how do I describe something in a way that I haven't read that description before? And so, yeah, I think music was really the gateway for me. And then luckily I got to poetry in high school and found a good used bookstore in my town, and sort of finding, I found Donald Hall and Marge Piercy and Charles Bukowski and Sharon Olds, and anything I could get my hands on, Nikki Giovanni, Rita Dove. And then I was like, oh, you can do this without music, which is really helpful because I don't play an instrument. so that was sort of the path for me.
Before you found poetry, were there books as a kid that were particularly beloved?
My favorite book as a kid was The Boxcar Children by Gertrude Chandler Warner. And it's funny, I bought it. I think I had a copy when I was a kid, or I just kept checking it out from the public library. And I didn't have it. And so when I had my daughter and she got to an age where I could read her that book, I bought a copy and I read it to her and didn't even remember that the youngest daughter in The Boxcar Children's name is Violet, which is my daughter's name. So I think maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, I didn't think I had any reason for naming her Violet, but now I'm wondering if it's because of that book. But that was my absolute favorite. And really, I think my other favorite was probably from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And both of those books have something in common, which is kids on their own. Like those two children are sort of locked in a museum overnight without parents. And then the Boxcar Children are orphans out on their own. And there was something about the adventure of kids without supervision that I absolutely loved, because they had so much freedom, but they also had so much responsibility. They had to figure stuff out on their own. And if their parents had been around, nothing exciting would have happened.
And it strikes me that those are also incredible stories of resilience, which is something that is so present in your work, especially in Keep Moving, but throughout your work. Oh, I love those books, both of them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so good. And I've like foisted them upon my children now. Those, and I was thinking the other one that I loved was do you remember the Westing game? There was this book called
No.
The Westing Game. Oh my gosh, go back and find The Westing Game, because I recently reread it, and I was like, this is a great book. Like I can't think of the author right now, but it's a mystery with lots of different characters, sort of like Clue. Oh, they're putting the links in the chat for these books. This is so great. So even if you're not, even if you don't have a middle grade reader in your house, these are worth, Ellen Raskin, that's right. These are worth reading, even if you're just a grown up who likes books.
All right, we have audience questions starting to arrive, and I have one exciting question, but I'll save that. So I want to make sure we get audience questions in. The first one comes from Kim, and she would like to know, what poetry books are you reading right now that you'd recommend?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I just finished a galley of Kate Baer's new book, which is coming out in November, which I quite loved. What do I have on I'm just looking on my desk, because usually when I finish books, I forget to reshelve them, because I have my poetry books shelved alphabetically, and it's a pain to climb up and put them all back. So the most recent reads are always just stacked on my desk. So if I lean over, I can tell you what I have read most recently. Carrie Fountain's The Life, which is fantastic. I reread Brenda Shaughnessy's Our Andromeda, Victoria Chang's Obit, Joanna Klink's excerpts from A Secret Prophecy. Also, I love Joanna Klink. Ellen Bass's Indigo, which was like, that book changed my life last year. That book is so good. And I have Camille, what do I have over here too? It's on the bottom, so I have to find it. I have Camille Dungy's Trophic Cascade here too. I mean, I read mostly poetry, so pretty much I'm reading several books at a time at any given time, because that's the beauty of a book of poems. You can open it, read a couple, dip in, set it down, forget where you put it, pick up another book, stumble back upon that book and a stack of things a week later, read a couple more poems.
Oh, the wonderful list of books. And I agree with you. That's a great thing about reading poetry books. Are you trying for the Seeley Challenge in August?
I don't do any challenges. I don't do any physical challenges either. Like, people are like, you should try to do this much exercise. I don't do that. I do no nutrition challenges. I find life challenging enough without challenges, though I do love the Seeley Challenge. I keep up with it on social media, because I like to see what other people are doing. Just like I keep up with the people who do 1,000 words of summer, the Jamie Attenberg, I love keeping up and seeing that other people are doing it. Meanwhile, I am not doing any of that.
Fair enough. Ileana would love to know, what does your poetry revision process look like, and how do you know when a poem is done?
Oh, that's so hard. So they start out a complete messy disaster, usually in a notebook, sort of scrawled. And eventually I put them into a Word document once I have enough on the page that it seems worth my time to put it in a Word document, because I only use these two fingers. I don't know how to type. So the rest of my hands are useless. I just use these guys. And so I do most of my writing longhand, because my brain works a lot faster than I can get these poor fingers to work. So once I get a shape, I get it into a Word doc, and then it can go through anywhere from 5 to 25 versions. And I always number them and save them separately. So it might be, verse, chorus, bridge is the last poem in this book, 1. And then when I revise it, I save 2 and I save 3, and I never save over unless I just fix a typo or fix a dropped word or something that I know I'm not going to have to retrace my steps to get back to that version, because I have learned something about myself, which is that I can fall into a trap of over revising. And so if I get to version 17, something has probably gone wrong, and I need to go back to versions 1, 2, and 3 and remind myself of the spark that sort of drove me to the page in the first place. And that will help me maybe even dial back some of the polishing from the later versions of the poem. But I guess revision advice I'd give is that everything is up for grabs every time. And I wrote about this in a piece for Lit Hub that just came out this week. It's every time I go back to a poem, it's not just like fixing stuff, but assuming that the title's right and everything's in the right order, but maybe just fixing little things. Every time I go back to the poem, I am asking the big questions of the draft. Is the title doing any work on the poem's behalf, or is it just kind of lying there? And is there another title that could be doing a little bit more heavy lifting, and what might that be? Is the beginning the beginning? Do we need it? Should it be the end? Should the end be the beginning? Is the middle completely flaccid and doesn't belong? And it's just a way of bridging something strong at the start with something strong at the end. What's the order of the pieces? What essential bits does the reader need that aren't here yet, that maybe I haven't realized? Or what extra stuff is here because I thought it was pretty, but it's not actually necessary to this poem, and maybe I should junk it or put it in some sort of like little side pen to use in some other something some other time. So I really do try to sort of keep a radical revision in mind with every draft, and not get complacent thinking that I knew the order that it should be in or what it should be doing.
When you're writing longhand, notebook, legal pad, unlined, lined?
It just depends on what I have in arm's reach, to be really honest. Like sometimes someone will like buy me a notebook or send me a notebook, and I'm like perfectly happy to use whatever it is. I kind of like the ones that have the little dots on the inside, because it's sort of like helps you kind of write in a straight line, but it's not so hemmed in that you feel like you can't write outside of the lines. Legal pads work great too, and they're not that expensive. Receipts in your wallet will do in a pinch, or the notes function on your phone, or even the audio function if you're out on a walk and don't feel like typing something in. So the key is just capturing it in the moment. For me, it doesn't really matter so much what it looks like.
Excellent.
Because I'll forget.
Totally. Next question from an audience member. Where do you go to learn about new authors, especially since we live in a city outside New York?
Well, I don't even know that that's so much of a disadvantage anymore. It's a disadvantage as far as having constant events to go to. I mean, sometimes I think, God, if I lived in New York, it might be really hard for me, because there'd be 50 things a night that I couldn't get to, and I'd feel it would be hard to choose. And at least here in Columbus, there's pretty much something literary going on every night of the week, but not like 50 every night of the week. So it's easy to make my selection. But I think I find poetry on social media a lot of times, because I follow other poets and they're recommending books. So if Victoria Chang posts a page of a book of poems and says, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm loving this book, then I'm going to find that book because she's my friend and I trust her taste. I get recommendations from friends all the time. So someone will text me and say, oh, I just picked this up and it seems just like your style. I read Poets and Writers, and I read the Times, and I read, the Writer's Chronicle, and I get Poem a Day from the Academy of American Poets in my inbox every morning. So almost without fail, unless some terrible company does an email blast really early, one of the first things I get to read every day is a poem by some other poet. And usually I read it on my back in bed, before I even get up. And so I start my day pre-coffee with a poem. And I think that's also a great way to get introduced to people that you might not have heard of before.
Love Poem a Day. We're all so grateful for the Academy of American Poets.
Such a gift.
Totally. All right, next question is from Chris, who would love to know, how do you keep track of your poems, organize them by categories, dates, file folders, or spreadsheets?
None. I don't keep track of them at all. So I just have, I was going to look at my desktop. I just have a desktop folder on my MacBook that just says new poems. And whenever I get an idea for a poem, I put it in a Word document and it goes in the new poems file. And that's it. There is a smaller folder in there that's drafts. So when I write version 15, I go ahead and put 14 in the drafts file. So there's only one version that I'm ever really looking at but I can always go back and get the olds. I don't keep track of anything, and it's probably not great, I'll admit that. But the secret perk of that is that sometimes when I'm going to put a book together, like I did with Goldenrod, and I printed out every poem in that folder since I'd published or turned in the manuscript for Good Bones, I found stuff in there I don't remember writing, and I have no idea. And I know it's mine. It's in Garamond 12, and it's in my folder on my computer, and it references something my son said. So I know it's my poem. But because I'm writing over many years and I'm not good at staying organized, I'm still surprising myself.
That's beautiful. I love the idea of surprising yourself in the writing process. I feel like surprise for the writer brings surprise and joy for the reader.
Yeah. Did I actually write that? Oh, I think I did. Yeah.
And we are getting glimpses of your lovely new tattoo as we are talking.
Oh, that's my
yeah. Yes. Tell us the story. When did you get it? How'd you decide to get it?
2 weeks ago, I got the goldenrod. I think I decided a few months back that I was going to do it. And so I emailed Jeremiah Griswold at White Whale Tattoo in Cincinnati, which is where I always go. And his wife, Becky, is a terrific poet too. So I've been working with her on her poems, and then he does my tattoos. It's like one big happy family. And so I just emailed and I said that I have a new book coming out and I'd love to celebrate by coming down sometime this summer and having you do some goldenrod. And I just want it to look like a botanical drawing, and I trust you, and I'll just be down. And so that's what we did. I just showed up and he showed me the drawing, and 2 hours later I was driving 2 hours home to Columbus with goldenrod on my arm. So that's the newest.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, this is a warning call to our audience that we have time for just a couple more questions. I have a very important one, which is, I know that you and I are both fans of Jenny's ice cream.
Oh,
what is your favorite flavor?
So they were so sweet. I tweeted, this is also the magic of Twitter. I tweeted last week when Goldenrod got a starred review in Publishers Weekly, which that was the first thing that had happened, first time that had happened to me. I tweeted like, time for celebratory Jenny's ice cream, meaning I was just going to drive to Jenny's and get an ice cream cone. And then they sent me an entire box of pints of ice cream to celebrate the book. So I have, they sent 6 pints of ice cream. I've already eaten one of them. And I promised my children that I would not eat any more because they want to eat the rest of it. I finished the wedding cake flavor, which was delicious. It's like vanilla, raspberry, lemon curd. I think I have several favorites. I love the salty caramel because I'm kind of old school. She used to make a mango lassi frozen, like a yogurt, that I was obsessed with, and they haven't carried it for years, which I'm very sad about. And they also used to carry, and I think maybe it'll make a comeback, a whiskey pecan that was incredibly good, and kind of actually even has like a little bite in like the back of your jaw from the whiskey, and it's just heaven. She's a poetry lover too. And she lives here in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh my
So,
gosh. I
yeah.
didn't think I could love Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream even more, but now to know
Oh,
she's a poetry lover, I do.
Poetry. She's an Ohioan and a poetry lover. And yes, a very cool person. So now you can feel even better about eating it.
We will all feel even better about eating Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream. Um, I I'd love to leave everyone with what's next for you, and what would you like all of us to be, in addition to buying Goldenrod, which we hope everyone is doing and reading and telling their friends about it. What's next?
What's next? I'm working on a picture book right now. I'm in edits on a picture book. So that's the next thing. And then I'm writing poems. I woke up in the morning a couple days ago with an idea in my brain and leaned over and typed it into my phone. And so yeah, working on some new poems when I can, when I have enough of that deep still time to do it. So yeah, so good things.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, I know that everyone who is listening is joining me in saying huge congratulations to you on this beautiful, beautiful book. And it's a gift to have your poems in the world. It's a gift to get to talk with you tonight. And we'll look forward to the quiet, still space and the next poems to come as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. I mean, thank you for taking the time and doing this tonight. I so appreciate it. And I can't wait till we can cross paths in real life.
Absolutely.
It'll
Absolutely.
happen.
Me too. It will. It will. We'll have ice cream.
Oh my gosh. Oh yes, it'll happen. And there will be ice cream.
I hope so, because that mango lassi yogurt you were talking about, Maggie, sounds amazing.
Oh my, it was so good.
It's so good.
I'm just like, now I feel like I need to send a little message to Jenny and say, okay,
Tweet about it.
I've been talking about the yogurt. What is it going to take to get that back?
I know. Well, thank you, both of you. Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Ruth, for such a wonderful discussion. And I know it really touched all of us hearing today. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. You can purchase copies of both authors' books using the links in our chat. And we have signed book plates for all copies of Goldenrod purchased through University Bookstore. So thank you again to Maggie and Ruth. Thank you to everybody here tonight. And we hope to see you at another one of our author events real soon. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks all. Good night.
Thanks all.